A controversial grindcore band with a name I can't even say on this platform had just planned a European tour. There was just one problem. Their drummer quit a few days before the tour. Instead of focusing on hiring a new drummer, they figured they would just find a drummer whilst in Europe. They auditioned 2 drummers and quickly realised their music was way too fast for the 2 musicians auditioning. Their solution was hiring both drummers for the tour, getting them to play 2 drum kits at the exact same time, and seeing who played faster. You're probably already noticing a huge problem with this plan. How can 2 drummers playing at different speeds play in time? Well, they can't. The difference in tempo, alongside the fact that the drummers didn't even know how to play the songs, made the concerts essentially inaudible. Although it didn't matter. If you were present at these shows, you'd quickly realise it was almost impossible to focus on the music due to the lead singer destroying equipment as well as attempting to fight any and every individual within the crowd using objects such as fire extinguishers, planks of wood and cinder blocks. This lead singer was named Seth Putnam, grindcore's most insane degenerate. Usually when exploring the lives of particularly violent musicians, you can go back to a time where these figures didn't exhibit any of their later bad behaviour and were simply just innocent children. It's a little different in the case of Seth Putnam, as he has claimed himself to always be a degenerate, even describing his behaviour as a child as being worse than what he would eventually become. Seth Putnam was born in Massachusetts on May 15, 1968, to English and Irish parents. At some point during Putnam's childhood, his parents would divorce, with his relationship with his father being particularly negative. In later interviews, Putnam would discuss his respect for aspects of his father's personality, although none of these traits can be considered positive in a traditional sense. According to Putnam, his father seems at the very least sociopathic, taking pleasure in deporting people within his line of work and apparently re-enlisting in Vietnam 3 times simply because he wanted to kill people. Putnam would excel in education from a very early age, developing the ability to read at a high level within kindergarten and even teaching other kids within the school. Well, this is according to Putnam anyway. As you'll find out later, this man isn't exactly trustworthy or even sane when engaging in interviews. He was forced to go to Catholic school and quickly lost interest in education around grade 3, although somehow still performed well, even skipping grade 6. Catholic school in the 70s wasn't exactly a kind and friendly place, often involving extremely strict and occasionally cruel punishment for the children that attended. One incident involved Seth having his head smashed against the blackboard by a nun. In response, Seth simply punched her in the face. He described this altercation in a later interview as the last time he got into a one-on-one fight, usually preferring to piss off large crowds instead. According to another interview, a nun broke a pencil over Putnam's head, so he proceeded to punch her in the stomach. Whether this is a separate incident or just Putnam's mashed potato brain confusing events, I'm not entirely sure. He claimed he was the envy of the school after the event and received no punishment from his parents for the incident. Putnam's hatred for nuns went further than just flying fists. He would quickly get into the more satanic side of heavy metal as a child, particularly enjoying acts such as Venom, Bathory, Sodom, and the most heinous of all, Village People. Somehow the Village People actually became Seth Putnam's favourite band, with Putnam even attending every single Village People concert within a week period and befriending the original Leatherman from the group. Putnam would get involved within the metal scene around the area, although quickly gained a negative reputation. As opposed to actually listening to the music or engaging in any normal concert behaviour, he would spend most of his time tormenting local bands. Examples include getting in fistfights with the band Possessed and wearing over-the-top John Travolta suits whilst breakdancing at local Wargasm shows. But yeah, this Wargasm, not the modern new metal cringe nepotism Wargasm that stole the other band's name. To be honest, I would 100% welcome Seth Putnam going sicko mode on these nepotism new metal PDF freaks. I'm actually sick of it at this point. When I search Wargasm into YouTube, I want to see these motherfuckers play blisteringly fast thrash metal riffs. I don't want to see somebody half naked attention seeking on stage alongside a guitarist that looks like he hasn't bathed in months. Seth began to revel in the idea that these bands were ending their sets early because of him and slowly fell in love with the fine art of trolling. Although Putnam's behaviour at shows didn't suggest that he had an enjoyment for the actual music, he still had an urge to create songs of his own. Inspired by the more extreme aspects of hardcore punk and death metal at the time, he decided to start a band in 1980 named The Losers composers. There was just one problem. Putnam knew zero musicians to collaborate with and couldn't even afford a guitar. His solution came in the form of him screaming nonsense over a toy guitar whilst his cousin whacked cardboard boxes as fast as possible. After a few years of typical upstairs neighbour behaviour, he eventually decided to actually play music as opposed to whacking pieces of plastic and cardboard. Although based on the genre he decided to play, you wouldn't really be able to tell the difference. He started creating music within the genre of noise and noisecore in 1985, specifically starting a band named Screaming Gorguts. The group would play just one show in their parents' living room, somehow garnering a large enough audience to be chased by an angry mob. Although in my research it mentioned how they were chased home, which makes zero sense if the concert was held at home, but to be fair, it wouldn't be a Coolio video without a sprinkle of misinformation. That same year, Putnam would play in another noise band named 7 Minutes of Nausea. In 1986, Putnam and his friends had collected a series of death metal fanzines, and after finding them amusing, decided to create their own joke version of a death metal fanzine. The fanzine would include completely fabricated bands with fake names. One of these fake joke bands would be named Satan's Warriors. Later that same year, Putnam found an opening for a band to perform on the radio and gathered together a lineup, creating a crude 4-song demo under the name Satan's Warriors. The demo featured Putnam on drums and vocals. The band played the show on the radio and continued to play live shows occasionally until 1988. At this point in time, Putnam had fallen in love with the greasy metalhead Heshlord lifestyle and subsequently began roadieing for the thrash metal band Executioner around this time. In 1986, Executioner would find themselves without a bassist after a previous member had broken his hand, shaved his head, and immediately got kicked out for not fitting the previously mentioned Heshlord image. Upon learning this, Seth quickly bought a BC Rich Warlock bass and joined the band. Whether he could play the instrument properly, I can't say, but based on his later performances and subsequent departure from the band, I'd doubt it. In 1988, Putnam decided he wanted to form a band of his own, a band where he could exercise full creative control and most importantly, frontman. He tossed and turned in bed, continuously scratching his little noggin, trying to think of a name that would fit his vision. He came up with a name so despicable, I can't actually say it on this platform without getting nuked by an ad review team, so just look it up and come back to the video. I will refer to the band as AC. So how did such a seemingly intelligent individual come up with a name that is so heinous it's made the production of this video much harder than it needs to be? Well, he literally just thought of the most offensive, stupid, dumb name possible and rolled with it. He immediately called up his friend and drummer Tim Morse, asking him to join the band. He explained how he wanted zero riffs, rhythm or even songs, just noise, and only wanted to play one show before breaking up. For some reason, Tim Morse found it hilarious and immediately agreed. AC played their first show in 1988. Well, I say show, it was more so a rehearsal in front of Putnam's close family members, including his grandmother. I can only imagine the disappointment on their face, and that's not even based on the name of the band, more so this wreck of a human being attempting to sing on stage. Grandma probably got flashbacks to the war. Despite the original promise of just one show, this silly little rehearsal just wasn't enough. I suppose one performance in front of your parents doesn't really live up to a level of degeneracy befitted of a name like AC. They continued to rehearse, playing wherever they could, including various basements and friends' houses, writing and performing what they labelled as anti-music. You may be wondering, what the is an anti-music? Well, it's essentially just music without everything that makes music music, you know, beats, rhythm, lyrics, melody, even song titles. It seems Seth was too busy punching nuns during music class as a kid to remember any actual musical concepts. They decided to arrange their first show alongside Putnam's other band, Satan's Warriors, scheduled to be played at Brandeis University Radio. Obviously, the show didn't go on for very long and of course didn't sound very good, resulting in a broken drum kit and a drummer running around screaming like a chimpanzee at the end of the set. What do you expect from grindcore? So that's it, right? Seth Putnam's joke band was finished after one performance, just as promised, right? Well, there was just one issue. Putnam really wanted Fred Ordonez from the band Scum to see AC, and when he no-showed, Putnam felt the urge to arrange a two-band show alongside Scum, as if one overly offensive grindcore band wasn't enough, might as well just chuck in another. The gig was played in Scum's rented warehouse and inspired Putnam to continue with the project, resulting in the creation of 88 songs, which upon listening leads me to believe has 88 short songs crammed in 13 minutes, although it's hard to tell one song from another. 88 songs would be released in 1989. You'd usually expect music of this nature to be ignored and subjected subjected to cassette tapes traded between only the greasiest of gatekeepers who just so happened to also be on FBI watch lists. Although this wasn't the case for AC, who actually began to receive some underground label attention for the tape. You see, the late 80s was one of the few periods within history where grindcore was profitable and was actually able to turtlehead its way into the mainstream in some cases. The creation of Earache Records in the UK in 1985 saw a home for the more extreme bands within hardcore punk at the time, with the most successful release coming in 1987 in the form of Scum by Napalm Death. Although Scum was definitely extreme for the time, with audience members actually assuming they were a joke at first, it somehow became a favourite of British radio presenter John Peel, who would regularly play Napalm Death on BBC Radio 1. This led to Napalm Death reaching number 7 on the UK indie chart, resulting in a much larger demand for this style of music. Earache took advantage of this and immediately shifted their heinous gaze towards AC. Surely a label that specialises in this kind of music would only benefit AC, pushing their extremely niche music towards an audience that would actually appreciate it. Yeah, AC just straight up turned it down, with Putnam deciding to create his own independent label to release music named Wicked Sick Records, which became home to such recognisable names as... This decision led the band into a form of limbo for a few years. They continued to play shows and release material, but quickly realised every tour resulted in a financial loss, with every project they released being subjected to limited bootlegs. It had even become a struggle to play shows at a financial loss, as venues and audience members would often boycott them due to their name, so they decided the crude joke had run its course and split up after their first European tour in 1990. During this hiatus, Putnam would work with various other bands and side projects, playing drums in Scum, as well as playing guitar for Upside Down Cross, who actually featured Jay Mascis at one point. Yeah, the same Jay Mascis that makes guitars for Male Manipulators. After all these projects with infinitely better names either fizzled out or imploded in spectacular fashion, Putnam saw it fit to reform AC in 1991, deciding to change up their style of playing to avoid any risk of burnout. This change in style just came in the form of actually playing music and ditching the whole no melody, no rhythm shtick. The band even released the first ever acoustic noise record around this time, which makes about as little sense as you'd expect. At this point in his career, Putnam hadn't done enough unethical crime to live up to his later reputation, meaning he was able to play alongside some of the most important bands within the early development of grindcore, specifically playing with the reformation of genre pioneers Siege, who had inspired the likes of Napalm Death a few years beforehand. 1992 saw AC embark on another European tour. How the these brothers had fans overseas is beyond me. The tour would be a musical disaster due to the drumming incident mentioned in the intro, although there was one positive. Despite the music sounding atrocious, AC had found their unique selling point as a band, and it was through audience abuse and Seth Putnam's batshit insane performances. According to Earache Records
USA label manager,
Putnam would perform as normal as possible for grindcore if the audience were fully into the music and moshing appropriately. It was if the audience began laughing or talking during his set that shit got ugly. He would pick up any item he saw fit and hurl it into the crowd, alongside actually hurling his own body into any solid object or person in his way. This was a habit that extended outside of just concerts. For example, Putnam would routinely launch himself into walls whilst just hanging out with his friends. This continuous bad behaviour resulted in Putnam's first infamous incident in 1993. AC had booked a show in San Francisco, although were only able to play just one song before Putnam was dragged off stage, with video footage showing audience members harassing Putnam after he came back into frame. Putnam obviously decided to taunt them in response. What exactly happened isn't entirely known, as it's not on camera, although what has been admitted by both Putnam and the victim is that Putnam launched his microphone straight into the victim's dome piece, with the woman claiming assault and Putnam claiming she dragged him off stage in some interviews, and in other interviews that he was pushed and just swung randomly whilst drunk. Regardless of what happened, it is still assault, and Putnam was charged as such, spending a night in jail and eventually being charged a $1,200 fine. Considering AC were a band that specialised in playing a style of music consisting of nothing musical, they had a surprising amount of demand within the underground. Unfortunately, their lack of record label and financial stability made creating physical copies basically impossible. AC decided to get in touch with Earache due to their previous interest, and for some reason, despite despite being denied and f***ed around by AC in the past for literally no reason, Earache Records saw dollar signs in whatever the f*** this is and decided to officially sign AC. At this point in time, the band's lyrical material was pretty tame considering the name of the band. Well, that's if you could actually understand any of the lyrics. The band's signing to Earache saw a shift towards a more hardcore punk direction, which usually comes hand in hand with socially charged political lyricism. Yeah, no, AC did not want to do that. They started writing songs that were full of overly offensive insults, delving into racism, sexism, xenophobia, essentially any phobia that involves hating a particular group. Their main goal was to piss people off with their subject matter and would attempt to gauge how offended the crowd was at particular songs during live shows, just so they could write even more heinous songs using that exact same subject matter. As you'd imagine, the band had continuous disagreements. It's pretty much inevitable when motherfuckers like this are within 20 feet of each other. These disagreements sometimes got so bad that Putnam considered breaking up AC altogether, although instead decided to continuously replace members. By 1995, Seth Putnam was the only original member of AC. It was also around this time that Putnam started utilizing what would become his catchphrase within AC songs. This came in the form of calling literally everything gay, obviously utilizing the term in a derogatory manner, which isn't something I endorse regardless of how funny it can be. Seth Putnam's performances alongside AC, as well as his personality outside of concerts, began to become infamous within local scenes throughout the United States, with the common consensus of him splitting pretty much down the middle. Many considered him to be simply an edgy comedian, spreading his jokes through music, whilst others saw him as a legitimately hateful and spiteful individual with extremely racist tendencies. Although, despite his behaviour, many also claimed how he was incredibly easy to work with whilst sober, and to be fair, that's a big issue, as Seth Putnam was rarely ever sober. Drugs and alcohol deteriorated Putnam's behaviour to such a level that it was almost impossible to hang out with him in public, as he would continuously harass and fuck with members of the public until the police were forced to get involved. There were even consistent rumours of extreme violence, with one of the alleged victims being a member of the band Grief. This said member had apparently become friends with Putnam, although it began to anger him after constantly complaining about his bad teeth and inability to eat corn on the cob. Seth Putnam's solution to this problem was allegedly smashing the band member in the face with a mic stand, knocking all of his front teeth out, and proceeding to act extremely confused when getting obvious backlash for this psychopathic act. Although Putnam was a menace in public, the majority of his negative reputation stemmed from his performances, where he would pretty much black out for the entire show, remembering nothing after returning backstage. Unlike other shock rockers such as GG Allin, Seth didn't really give a fuck about how he presented himself and wasn't pushing any form of anarchy, agenda, or even successful music. Oftentimes he wasn't even trying to put on a performance, he just did it because he could. Also, whilst we're on the topic of GG Allin, according to various bandmates, Putnam actually smelled considerably worse than GG Allin, which is something I didn't think was feasibly possible. For the most part, Seth Putnam's reputation subjected AC to concert venues that somewhat accepted the style of performance the band had become accustomed to, although the novelty of their name led them to some unlikely places. Whilst in England, the band would occasionally be booked to play upper-class Harvard University parties. You may be wondering why a group of individuals whose most recent trauma involves getting within 6 feet of a homeless person would want to face a drug-fueled Seth Putnam at a party. Well, it's because they didn't actually know anything about the band apart from the band's name. If you're aware of the English upper class, specifically university students, they have a tendency to partake in degeneracy that actually rivals Putnam in terms of how disgusting it is, only they do it behind closed doors and speak with a posh accent, so might as well throw them in the House of Commons. This quote-unquote culture led to organisers of these parties hiring AC as a joke based on their name, which only resulted in Seth Putnam traumatising these coddled freaks by completely desecrating their party and wrecking their house. Due to Putnam's increasingly negative reputation, every fanzine in America wanted to interview him, which most of the time went just as well as you'd expect. In 1997, Seth Putnam had an interview with Bill Zebub for Grimoire of Exalted Deeds, which is a notoriously degenerate metal publication that still sees online articles to this day. During the interview, Zebub would continuously accuse Putnam of being Jewish, so much so that he hung up out of pure rage. At the time, Zebub was unaware if Putnam was actually angry or just playing up the character, so just thought nothing of it. Putnam's real-life anger became apparent when a fan of Grimoire had a bar stool thrown at his head by Putnam. Zebub immediately rang Putnam asking what the problem was. was. He explained that he was angry Zabab had told others that he was Jewish and became aggressive because of that. Zabab proceeded to explain that the interview was conducted by another writer named Rob Noxious, who was actually an AC superfan and hoped that Seth would just find the whole thing funny. Upon learning this, Seth simply responded with "Okay, everything is cool then," and immediately dropped his anti-Semitic rage. One phone call turned Seth Putnam from barstool throwing maniac into chill metalhead themed hippie. By this point, AC's music and subject matter had become so heinous that it'd be a death sentence to actually mention any song names or delve into lyricism within this video. Although many people attribute the lyricism as simply Putnam's morbid sense of humour, his friends at the time often felt much of his lyricism and art stemmed from real hatred, with any interview from the time seemingly backing that up. Although it's literally impossible to tell as we're attempting to analyse a drugged out attention-seeking edgelord. The vile behaviour went further than just their original material. AC would commonly cover songs from overtly racist acts within the grindcore scene, and also had a habit of covering the song I'm Still Standing if they were faced with any handicapped people within the audience. By 1998, Putnam's drug issues had become so bad that he overdosed on poppy seed injection and was pronounced dead for 10 minutes. When AMTs arrived, they attempted to revive Putnam, but to no avail. Before giving up, they attempted to revive him one more time just in case. By some miracle, this was actually able to bring Putnam back to life. Whilst in the ambulance, he was told that he was going to have brain damage for the rest of his life and would likely need rehabilitation. Putnam shrugged this off, and as soon as he arrived at the hospital, said he felt normal and just walked home, somehow unscathed after his brain was denied oxygen for 10 minutes. I suppose this does explain a lot. Around this time, Putnam's various other isms and phobias were joined by sexism, as he apparently had his heart broken by a girl that he actually liked. This led him to be completely anti-woman and inspired him to try to romantically fuck over as many women as possible. I can't imagine he was too successful. I reckon the victim pool is probably pretty small. 1999 saw the recording and release of AC's final album on Earache Records entitled It Gets Worse. Much of the subject matter on the album was so offensive that the label was forced to censor song names and lyrics in an effort to not get sued. They were subsequently dropped from Earache for supposed distributor problems. This probably stems from the fact that they were forced to sell their albums on a mail order basis, as most record stores wouldn't allow it. Despite no longer being signed to a record label, the band still wanted to tour, although once again found themselves without a drummer. They decided that they would hand out flyers at a local 6 Feet Under show in an attempt to find their new drummer. Of course, AC couldn't help themselves but fuck with 6 Feet Under's lead singer Chris Barnes, specifically taunting him for being kicked out of Cannibal Corpse. After Barnes got off stage, Putnam continued to heckle him. Barnes retaliated by grabbing him, resulting in an altercation. According to Putnam, he proceeded to beat the shit out of Barnes backstage before getting jumped by 7 roadies and thrown out by bouncers. In various interviews since, Putnam has claimed that 6 Feet Under avoided playing in the same location as AC for years, although actually admitted to being a fan of Chris Barnes in the band. You'd think Putnam would learn his lesson and stop verbally harassing musicians, especially musicians that are actually supporting his band whilst on tour. Yeah, no. In 2000, a band named Drop Dead would open for AC, resulting in a huge brawl at the end of the show. This came after Putnam decided to sling various racial slurs in the direction of Bob Otis from Drop Dead. This inspired the audience to join in, which made Otis so angry he knocked Putnam off stage, sparking a huge fight within the crowd. Perhaps the biggest fight of Putnam's career would also occur in 2000, which apparently was a busy year for Putnam's degenerate tendencies. AC were booked to play New England Metal and Hardcore Festival, with the band being set to headline the second stage. As the festival name suggests, the event combined prominent punk, metal and hardcore artists, and as you'd expect, a typical hardcore band likely isn't a fan of a crusty old edgelord metalhead. This became very obvious when hardcore band Hatebreed had technical problems on their stage and were forced to move to AC's stage to play the slot before them. When Hatebreed got on stage, the crowd, who were expecting to see AC, became enraged at the sight of what could actually be good music, leading Hatebreed singer Jamie Jaster to respond by calling them washed up metalheads and claiming that Hatebreed were more popular than AC. Putnam was expectedly drinking next door whilst this was all going down and came to the stage for the end of Hatebreed's set. set. He proceeded to get verbally abused by Jasta, resulting in a huge melee within the crowd. According to a lost VHS tape which documents the entire incident, Putnam was standing 20 feet away from the fight the entire time, although the only people arrested at the end of the night were Putnam and his wife. Obviously, continuing to burn bridges and destroy venue property within a scene that's already extremely niche and has little potential financial gain is going to cause issues, resulting in AC once again breaking up in 2001. The band would reform in 2003, proceeding to tour with prominent acts such as Napalm Death. Although this return to music wouldn't last long, as Putnam, who had seen himself as invincible for years, was about to have his life changed forever. Putnam would be put into a drug-induced coma in 2004, receiving brain damage that left him unable to walk after the incident. According to Putnam's friends, he was found surrounded by poppy seeds, baking sugar, alcohol and which led them to assume the overdose was due to one of these various things. According to Putnam, however, his tolerance was so ridiculously high that it wouldn't allow him to overdose on any of these drugs, with the coma being a result of an over-the-counter sleeping pill named Ambien. This is the story as told by Putnam during an interview. After he partook in a monumental drug binge that would have left any normal person gasping for air, Putnam became incredibly depressed and decided to purchase a gram of poppy seeds with the intention of utilizing it for self-deletion. I hate this platform. When arriving at the hotel room, he sat, reflected, and eventually decided not to partake in self-deletion. He switched hotel rooms, although was unable to sleep, so took 2 months worth of Ambien sleeping pills, which I suppose did the job. He did fall asleep, although perhaps a little bit too well. The pills sent him into a coma, resulting in severe nerve damage, meaning Putnam struggled to walk after waking up. I wonder why legal over-the-counter pills left Putnam in a worse state than the time he was pronounced dead for 10 minutes after ODing on illegal drugs. I wonder. He was in such a bad state that his doctors considered pulling the plug, as they assumed he had received irreparable brain damage. What they didn't realize is Seth Putnam is the definition of irreparable brain damage. Although that does sound like a joke, there is actually a little bit of truth to that. Putnam has always been very closed off with strangers and exhibited that same behavior with his doctors after the coma. This led his doctors to believe that his brain damage was worse than what it actually was. When Putnam realized this, he had to force himself to have a normal conversation with the doctors to prove he was able to function and be let go. By December that same year, Putnam was forced into a nursing home where he was bedridden and barely able to walk, although after months of therapy, regained the ability to shuffle around the site. By June that next year, Putnam just randomly showed up at an I Hate God show and requested some set time. They agreed and allowed Putnam to play at the concert. The show would apparently be Putnam's first sober show in 11 years and was a far cry from the complete anarchy of previous AC shows, not just because of Putnam being painfully sober, but due to the fact that he was forced to sit down during the entirety of the performance due to his brain damage. Although the coma did actually do irreversible brain damage, affecting his ability to walk and causing constant fainting, he still decided to perform regularly, although would often sing from a chair and pass out all the time. Despite the damage, Putnam looks back on the incident positively, mentioning how it put a stop to an extremely negative downward spiral. The most ironic thing about the entire coma situation is the fact that AC had actually released a song 7 years beforehand named You're in a Coma, making fun of any individual that may find themselves within a coma. You'd think this cruel irony would annoy Putnam somewhat, although he would remark in a later interview that being in a coma was as stupid as he wrote it, and continued to perform the song regularly. Seth continued to play with AC, although the concert shenanigans of the past were well and truly over. His mobility was severely limited. This extended further than just being forced to sit. He also spent entire shows unconscious in some cases. Why the band kept playing during these incidents, I do not know. At some point around this time, an incident would occur involving Seth's mother. For some reason, he would invite his elderly mother to an AC show, which led to her being beaten up in the mosh pit by greasy metalhead kids. A friend of Putnam pulled her out of the pit, which led to Putnam becoming extremely furious at him for doing so. I'm not sure whether Putnam intended for his mother to get hurt or not. The 2010s came around. The band continued doing what they had always done, releasing offensive music and playing very short although loud concerts, with Seth comfortably sitting and uncomfortably screaming screaming as the frontman. This would unfortunately come to an end in 2011 due to the death of Seth Putnam. He would die at the age of 43 of a heart attack after a suspected binge. Despite his infamy, his death would be reacted with sadness by the vast majority of the metal community, who looked past his heinous actions and opinions, celebrating a man who pushed forwards the genre of grindcore and literally never gave a single f. Seth Putnam differs from many other shock rock artists in the fact that he would have still likely been remembered even without his antics. AC, alongside his efforts with multiple other bands, pushed forwards the genre of grindcore, which is a genre that still sees niche popularity to this day. Unfortunately, regardless of any innovations he may have been responsible for, it is the case that Putnam was likely just an incredibly disturbed and hateful man. Most of the shit he did was for quite literally zero reason. He just enjoyed harassing people and making them uncomfortable. A lot of the discussion online regarding Putnam centers around his lyricism and song titles, and whether he was actually as racist, sexist, and homophobic as the subject matter suggested. Many argue that he was simply a provocateur, a comedian pushing boundaries through music, although comments from former friends and interviews suggest he was just incredibly hateful, with many of his actions likely being due to negative mental health and addiction issues. I swear to God, the amount of people online who idolize obviously mentally ill musicians from the past is getting disturbing. What about this man, or this man is appealing in any way apart from morbid curiosity or ad revenue for me? Actually, scratch that. They are incredibly appealing and interesting. If only there were more videos about